Okay, maybe we can start while the others join in. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar on implementing social media campaigns to generate demand for condoms in Africa. Thank you for this opportunity to open this webinar. My name is Purvi Shah. I'm a consultant with WHO and UNAIDS headquarters, and I support countries on virtual interventions and testing, mainly in Asia and Africa. Condom promotion and access are critical pillars of our work to end AIDS by 2030. This aligns with the goals outlined in the UNAIDS Global AIDS Strategy and the WHO's Global Health Sector Strategy on STI as well. There have been many gaps in condom promotion and distribution and as part of the HIV program. Also, gaps in demand creation activities often become a barrier. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Purvi.
Sorry, it just went off. Sorry. So there have been many gaps in condom promotion and distribution as part of the HIV program. As we know that, there have been a lot of demand creation activities that have been happening in the past, but it often becomes a barrier when it comes to accessing commodities. And some of the known gaps are low budget for demand creation, low priority in programs for demand creation, lack of understanding of target audiences, and also demand creation being completely target driven rather than needs driven. Social media offers significant potential to reach key and vulnerable populations with tailored messaging to increase awareness, demand, and uptake of condoms. The approaches showcased today build on the guidance in our recent policy brief on virtual interventions for HIV, STI, and viral hepatitis that was published by UNAIDS and WHO last year. A lot of countries struggle with how to create demand for services, and I commend FHI 360 for leading this innovative project across 4 countries and developing a practical toolkit to guide implementers. It's a concrete example of how we can leverage technology while ensuring interventions remain people-centered. This collaboration represents the kind of innovation we need to accelerate the progress towards UNAIDS 95-95-95 goal. Thank you for inviting UNAIDS and WHO to contribute at this important webinar. We are fully committed to supporting countries on comprehensive stigma-free HIV programming, including virtual components tailored to those most in need. With those opening remarks, I think we need to move on in the agenda. And now I would like to invite I would like to now invite Danny Simmons from FHI 360 to give a project overview. Danny is a technical advisor for telehealth at FHI 360. One of his focus areas are online demand creation, and he has been leading this type of work in the Caribbean and in Africa. Over to you, Danny.
Thank you, Purvi. Next slide, please. And the next slide. Okay, so I want to give you a bit of a context here as it relates to the need or the problem that we're trying to solve with this project. We found that condom use remains below the 90% target in all the 4 countries. And the 4 countries involved in this project are Malawi, Mozambique, Uganda, and Zambia. And except for Malawi, the other 3 countries have seen stagnation or decreases in their condom use among certain priority groups. And we found too that there is a lack of recent comprehensive data on condom use to help prioritize and understand the key drivers of condom use among different population segments. Next slide, please. National condom programming strategies in all the 4 countries identify increased demand and innovation as promotion strategies for priority populations, especially noting that the use of virtual platforms are underutilized. The countries have committed to integrating condom promotion across HIV and SRHR programs, but strengthening messages within these existing channels is much needed. And so these investments are intended to develop online or virtual materials with local content for community-based organizations, but current capacity to do so was quite lacking. Next slide. So then comes the UNAIDS Global Fund with funding through the Innovation Challenge to address this gap. And to address the gap, the Condom SI has prioritized some investment in capacity strengthening for community-based organizations who ultimately are developing online or virtual demand creation content infused with local relevance and context. Next slide, please. So in a partnership with FHI 360, we created a project to strengthen capacity to lead demand generation of condoms through online and mobile platforms in those 4 countries in Africa: Malawi, Zambia, Uganda, and Mozambique. We entered into an agreement in October, but really kicked off the project in terms of our engagement with local partners in January of this year. So since then, we've been engaging stakeholders to build out what the project will look like and work on some key deliverables from the project, which includes the coordination on a regional toolkit and the provision of technical assistance to some of our implementing partners to design and implement social media campaigns in the 4 countries. But key among this is regional and country knowledge exchange that facilitates cross-sharing of ideas and lessons throughout these months of implementation. Next slide, please. What are the benefits for the implementing partners? Through this initiative, we have worked together with the partners on an adaptable communication toolkit, which we call the QuickStart Guide. It was first drafted by FHI 360, and then we work with the partners to roll out their campaigns, build their capacity following this QuickStart guide. And over time, we will improve the guide and finalize with lessons learned and case studies from our implementation. We are also providing individualized technical assistance to design and deliver social media campaigns, and providing support from a creative agency to bring these ideas to life through designing of static and motion graphic content and by providing overall creative direction. FHI 360 has also allocated ad credits towards the social media campaigns for condoms. So as soon as the implementers were ready to launch their campaigns, we helped them to set up their ad managers and launch their campaigns with ad credits we provided. Next slide, please. Some outcomes of the project, one of them is what we call the Virtual Intervention Situational Analysis, or VISA for short. And I'll make mention of VISA throughout the presentation. And an online survey with reports that are available to the partners to inform their campaign plans. So we did anticipate that there were some program level data available that could help the implementers take decision about how they want to structure their campaign and implement. But we also introduced these 2 approaches to get more information. By the end of the project, as I said earlier, we'll also have a validated QuickStart guide that will be available to implementers beyond the project. And implementers' capacity would have been developed to implement and monitor the virtual demand creation campaigns for condoms on their own. Next slide, please. By the end of the project, partners would have also launched their own condom campaigns online, and we would have established, hopefully, a platform for intra-regional exchange. And the implementing organizations will have learned how to introduce mechanisms that help clients to request condoms online through their online campaigns. Next slide, please. Okay. So I wanted to give you a basic structure of this guide that is ultimately the guiding framework for everything. Even today's presentations will be broken down into these thematic areas of prioritize and learn, create and implement, monitor and adjust. And as I mentioned, that toolkit that we're working on with these different sections will be finalized in December and is built heavily on the informed experiences of the implementers that we're working with. So as we go through the presentation, it will make more sense what these broad thematic areas represent, and I will be walking you through them. Next slide, please. Capacity strengthening is the central theme or element of the project. So the QuickStart guide is complemented by a set of templates that help partners strategize key campaign design and implementation steps. And over several months, since January, we've formed a group of what we call implementers, learners, and advisors who join monthly training sessions with activities that culminate in a campaign brief. The implementers are partners that we have selected and worked with in each of the country with some degree of capacity to implement campaigns. So they are not necessarily new to social media, but maybe not so advanced in social media advertising or social media for SPCAC. So what we have done is to select these persons to roll out following the campaign, the key campaign steps of the QuickStart guide. And then we have another category of members who we call learners, who may not have that capacity to implement campaigns on their own, but are working alongside implementers to learn and try new things as well. But there were no ad credits or support from the creative agency provided to these organizations at this time. And then there are advisors, which include a more experienced class of implementers who probably have implemented large-scale national condom campaigns, as well as representatives from the Condom SI and Ministry of Health and other TWGs. Next slide, please. So the implementers we have decided to work with are spread across the 4 countries. In some countries, we have more than one. In some countries, we have, for example, in Zambia, we have 2 partners working together. And you see their target audience here, working towards reaching youth males and females, age 16 to 24. In Malawi, we have 2 partners there spread across the general population and also youth audience. And in Uganda, again, 2 different organizations. But for Uganda, there may be a chance they include FSW in their launch. For Mozambique, it's 1 partner, and that's Amodifa, working with youth males and females aged 15 to 25 and MSM 18 to 35. Sorry, next slide, please. All right, so we're now at the point where we're going to be talking about the first phase of implementation, or really the first step in the toolkit, and it's called prioritize and plan. Next slide, please. So to summarize what this is all about, I've just put some bullets here for you. The objective of this phase is to really work with our implementers to gather and analyze as much information that can to set the campaign priorities. It answers the question, who do we want to reach? How do we want to reach them? And how do we make that linkage from a campaign to an offline supply of commodities? Essentially, a major outcome of this phase is a social media campaign brief highlighting those key decisions. And we remain focused on understanding the target audience and their condom use and needs. When it comes to where getting the data sources, I would have mentioned some of this earlier. We leverage any program data that is available, and we also look at introducing surveys and a landscape analysis, which I mentioned, we call it the visa. Next slide, please. When it comes to the visa, it's really meant to help understand each country's context. It specifically focuses on current virtual condom initiatives, internet penetration levels, and the prevalence of social media. So the visa is really an in-depth desk review, and there are about 3 methods involved here. We did an extensive search of online libraries, directories, and also consulted with the local steering groups in each country to help direct us in the right path. What we have found coming out on top based on the visa results is that social media challenge are the most viable means for online demand creation in these 4 countries. So after assessing all of the virtual interventions that we could find that closely relate to condom distribution or SRHR, we realized that social media channels are underutilized and could could play an integral role in this project. Next slide, please. So in terms of some of those other gaps that we found, I just mentioned social media channels being underutilized for demand creation. Online campaigns, if any, not necessarily just for condoms, but even when we did see some campaigns that were short-term or short-lived or sporadic, usually around World AIDS Day, there is usually a disconnect with offline condom supply, and there is a focus more on awareness than service uptake. The absence of facilitating this shift from awareness to action has also diminished campaign effectiveness. So a lot of programs were not necessarily measuring campaign outcomes, demonstrating whether or not people's behavior were being changed as a result of the campaigns, or if there was any level of service uptake. FHI 360 has worked in several contexts to deliver virtual interventions, and we have learned that beyond social media, there are spaces where we can engage, especially at-risk or key populations. And we found in 4 countries that there has been no evidence so far of any program venturing into spaces beyond social media to include dating apps. Mobile apps, given rising smartphone use, remain an untapped avenue for demand creation. We also did not observe at the time of the visa any campaigns that even used SMS to broadcast services and promote any distribution points for condoms. Next slide, please. We recognize that insufficient data on past campaigns, and I'm not speaking about any of the virtual campaigns, just campaigns in general. Like a lot of programs are familiar with Condoms in Malawi and Uganda. We really couldn't find a lot in the public domain about the effectiveness of those campaigns and how we could leverage those and bring them into the virtual space for continuity. Limited initiatives also address the sociocultural obstacles to condom use in target countries. So we recognize that a lot of the implementers we do work with are going to be linking clients to socially marketed condoms. And partners are learning for the very first time that we can actually market those condoms in a very sexy way, in the same way that corporate brands also market their condoms. There's a noticeable underrepresentation in promoting female condom brands, but we also learned throughout the process why, based on how people responded to behavioral questions. Like, for example, we learned through a focus group with SAT in Zambia that females do expect their male counterpart in a straight relationship to be the ones to bring the condoms. And so the demand among females is lower, and also an under-researched area where we could potentially look at for more details and understand more about those supply chains. The target demographics seem under-involved in campaign design and execution. So we have one country example where they have done many focus groups to test the content and validate what is going out there. But in a broader scheme of things, some programs do not take effort to involve specific target audiences in the design of their campaigns. And while campaigns primarily highlight HIV prevention, they're potentially sidelining other STIs and unplanned pregnancies. Next slide, please. So I won't share a ton of data in this presentation. We expect to finalize these reports that will be useful beyond the 4 countries involved. But essentially, here on my screen, we did just look at internet penetration rates and mobile connectivity rates across the 4 countries. And when it comes to internet penetration rate against the population, we found that countries like Mozambique, Uganda, and Zambia had similar rates of internet penetration against the size of the population. And Malawi had the lowest, but also not significant when compared to the others. And we know that this is a dynamic space. So by the next time we look at this data again, we might be inching much, much closer to 50%. Because when we looked at the data in previous years, there has certainly been an increase. When it comes to mobile connectivity rates, Zambia and Uganda had similar rates, well above 50%. Zambia having 80% of the population connected through mobile technology, as well as Uganda, and Malawi and Mozambique were above 50% of the population. Next slide, please. I would have mentioned earlier on that the virtual intervention situation analysis led us to social media as that ideal place to do online demand creation in these 4 countries. So we found that Facebook is more prevalent in all the countries. And it is definitely one of the main points to do advertising. And Facebook and Instagram are now together. So it's while Instagram users are not that high across the populations in the different countries, we still have the added value of marketing condoms to audiences in the 2 countries using both Facebook and Instagram. Platforms like Twitter and Facebook Messenger were not as heavily utilized, and we don't have enough data sources that point to anything about TikTok and WhatsApp. So we'll need to do some further research in that regard. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm almost out of time, but I wanted to talk to you too about our online survey that we did. So the visa report was very qualitative in nature. It looked at some of those public domains of data that we could access, validated, of course, by our local steering groups. But we had to introduce a survey that brought us closer to the audiences to understand more about their own preferences for online services, as well as their behaviors or perceptions about condoms. We incentivized the campaign in 3 countries. And what we mean is we promoted a prize of, like mobile credit. If you participated in the survey, you'd be entered in this draw where you could win some mobile credit. And then we also found that in countries with higher internet rates or social media users, we advertised this online survey on Facebook in all countries, but our ad competed with other ads. And so uptake was not as high as the countries with lower internet penetration rate. Next slide, please. And I'm going to make this example by just showing you what the uptake for the survey was like. When we look at countries like Malawi with 18,636 people clicking on the ad links, 712 people started the survey and 232 people completed it, representing nearly 40% of the total respondents across all 4 countries, right? And then in more connected countries are the most connected country, which is Mozambique. We had 24,000, almost 25,000 people clicking the survey link, but 464 started and only 94 or 16% of respondents completed the survey. Next slide, please. So some lessons I want to quickly share are observations. Most implementers were thinking strategically about social media for the first time through this project. We heard from people who said, who would walk into the very first training session saying, we know how to use Facebook. We use it every day. We know how to boost a post. But then when we walk them through some of the intricacies of the ad managers and show them how we could use these tools to reach people we want to reach and bring and also follow methodologies that are used by commercial brands, people got really excited about the prospects of that approach. And while online to offline models are important for service uptake, we've stressed this in capacity building. Only a handful of programs were equipped during this project to integrate virtual channels for condom distribution. And what do I mean by that? I mean having human resources, especially, and other resources in place to monitor requests that come in for condoms online and also meet that demand. Nonetheless, through this project, All programs are going to be modeling one approach or another that will allow them to monitor that uptake. My colleague Martin will present after me, and he'll share what they're doing to demonstrate this. We also found that integrating with national TWGs and forging local partnerships enhances the positioning of online demand generation campaigns for favorable outcomes. And there's also potential to further develop virtual channels, enabling clients to seamlessly request and obtain condoms. This, if we use technology like booking technology or we have seen apps, and FHI has also developed an app where people can order condoms online and have them delivered or picked up at a particular point, will draw clients nearer to last mile distribution. And it could also help commodity forecasting. A lot of implementers, especially those who are on smaller scales, do not have strategies in place to help with forecasting and know when they're critically low on supply, if they do have supply, and so on and so forth. But we see that kind of strategy happening at a much higher level above them. Next slide, please. And it's back to you, Purvi. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny, for that overview and giving us a deeper dive in the implementation phase 1. I will quickly move to the next presentation, which is a case example from Zambia. So I'd like to invite Martin Silukena from SRHR Africa Trust to share their experience about the campaign and which they did for young people. Martin is a senior program officer, currently the program lead at SAT Zambia. Over to you, Martin.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, depending on where you have joined us from. Coming from SAT Zambia is one of the partners that are working on this project. We collaborate with the Coparos here in Zambia. Next slide. SAT is a 32-year-old NGO and a network of activists, NGOs, and other supporters that primarily focus on young people around sexual reproductive health and rights and the drivers of adolescent health and wellness. All our programming is with young people and through young people, and our youth hubs and partner organizations link young people to one another, as well as linking them to health services. Indeed, taking note of this presentation, I was supposed to co-facilitate it with Ngandwe, who is a young person, but he's got another assignment, making a presentation on the work we do around social media somewhere in The Hague. The next slide. Yes, in terms of our approach, SAT decided to design a single social media campaign with our partner Coparos here in Zambia. And in our campaign, it is built around our existing platform, which is called YouthWise. YouthWise incorporates the use of an app, the use of Facebook as an approach that delivers services, information, education, and communication to young people around sexual reproductive health. Our target audience are boys and young men in the age group 16 to 24, as well as adolescent girls and young women aged 16 to 24. We envisage to increase awareness and accessibility of condoms to achieve 30% uptake among our target audience in the long term. Next slide. SAT's campaign approach embodies, among other things, a survey that was done, which is the visa and an online survey. And we utilize the existing program data from focus groups and other relevant spaces, including frequent consultations, to determine the most ideal approach for our campaign. We analyzed the avenues for condom supply and agreed that we would want to lead a campaign that drives young people to existing distribution points, but also promotes peer-led support. Next. So our model, the YouthWise model, embodies a social media campaign marketed through our YouthWise platform, which has Facebook, it has Twitter, it has WhatsApp, but also incorporates, oh, can we go to the last part, previous slide? Thank you. We have lost the slides.
Yeah, one moment, Martin. Looks like our person skipping through has disconnected or something. Let me try to share. Are you seeing my slides?
Yes, I can see.
All right, great.
Yes, I was speaking to our model, which we call YouthWise. This is a social media campaign, and it's a platform that brings together elements of this, Facebook, WhatsApp, and Twitter, but also it has a physical component where we have peer educators on standby that provide referrals and follow-up on services, connecting young people to health facilities and spaces where they can access condoms. At the same time, there are people that generate demand and also connect traffic onto our social media spaces. The next slide. This project has brought a lot of benefits to us. And one of them is an opportunity to pioneer a youth-led social media campaign that is enhancing our capacity to expand our social media outreach, particularly targeting young individuals with information on condoms. Indeed, we have also seen an enhanced strategic planning for social media initiatives. Before then, we're not very keen in being so focused around our work in strategic media engagements, but this was an opportunity for us to see other prospects that led us to other opportunities within social media campaigns after an engagement with FHI 360. It has deepened our comprehension and refined our social media programming, including campaign planning, content creation, and the onboarding of pertinent personnel that should lead greater service linkages. And so for now, we feel very comfortable in taking forward our social media campaign, particularly in this context, the condom campaign. Next slide. Yes, this project has also given us an opportunity to gain knowledge through exchange that has been amplified on digital platforms and interaction thereof. Through this avenue, we have created new partnerships, and now we are working with the Copperos, which organization we're not working with closely before, but it's given us an opportunity to engage around promoting the health of young people. This collaboration has driven us to adopt a more proactive and visionary approach, especially when seeking partnerships. Our ongoing collaboration with BBC Media Action stands as testament to this, acting as a significant catalyst in our concurrent projects. Indeed, the project served as a platform to prepare for our next collaboration, which is a collaboration with BBC Action Media. And so on the basis of the knowledge that we acquired on this project, we're able to meaningfully engage and collaborate with BBC Media Action. The technical assistance guides our future endeavors for effectively reaching young individuals with pertinent health services in a user-friendly manner. This means that we are really optimistic about the future after undergoing through the capacity strengthening support that we have gotten from FHI 360. Next. Thank you very much. At this point, we can allow for questions if there are any questions relating to our experience and the presentation that I've just made.
Thank you very much, Martin, for that excellent example. I think we don't have any questions in the chat, neither in the Q&A function. So I would request if anybody has a question, you could either raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask. Any questions for Danny for the overview? Okay, there's one question in the chat. You mentioned about the chat box. What's the experience using the chatbot? So I assume this is for Martin. Could you respond?
Yes. Thank you very much. Within the YouthWise framework, we have a team of people that respond to young people that have questions, that have issues for follow-up. We have a team of 4 young people. These are available 24/7 to respond to questions. But at the same time, we have also an escalation in terms of if there are questions that are a bit challenging to the 4 young people, they are health experts that take up the matters that may arise out of the reach of the 4 young people.
Thank you, Martin. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, while we gather questions from the audience, I had a question for Danny. So Danny, when you were planning this project, how did FHI 360 actually select organizations that could be used as implementers?
Yeah, thanks, Purve. So we had established what we call a regional stakeholder group, and it consisted of country managers from both UNAIDS and UNFPA in the different countries, as well as representatives from the Global Fund and other organizations working with the Global Fund. So over time, we created a set of criteria that would be used to decide among the interests, who would be those organizations that implement campaigns, as well as who it might be better for them to be play a more advisory role based on the level of their experience. So the project is very short term, and there weren't enough resources to make like sub-awards and so on. So we wanted to work with organizations like SAT, who had some amount of capacity to bring in, the technology, mobile data, staff that could do some of this work. And that's one of the key criteria there. But chief among that is an interest in actually venturing into this space and support working with it through the end. In some settings like Malawi and Uganda, you'll see we've identified more than one organizations to serve as implementers because they have different audiences that they will reach. So later you learn about like the steps we're taking to bring the campaign live, but you'll also learn that we're still in very early stages of campaign launch. So it is not probably before another webinar next year that we can probably share concretely the results of uptake and so on and so forth. But we are diversifying target audience by partners, and the learners, they're onboarded as well based on that interest they have to venture into this space. But also these are organizations that are also peaked to introduce virtual interventions later on, our social media campaigns, and to use this experience to advocate for the type of resources or staffing that they would require to do this work. So there was, in a nutshell, quite a bit of consultation. We did some interviews, we called around, and we evaluated organizations against a very simple criteria and worked with those most willing to enter into an agreement with us for the technical assistance for capacity building. Over.
Very interesting, I must say. And so just a follow-on question to that, when we are talking to countries about social media and advertising, etc., a lot of countries post-COVID have tried social media campaigns and advertising, but what confuses them often, or a barrier that I've seen often, is how do you select your target audience? And so any tips for implementers on how do you actually select your target audience for social media campaigns?
I think I want to share this one with Martin. He can also speak to their own experience at SAT, how they decided what audience they want to work with. But I know particularly for this project, a lot of the implementers were more inclined to bring social media campaigns to their current clientele. So if I'm an organization that has funding to reach a particular population, I'm inclined to use this TA to introduce campaigns that reaches that audience. But in the bigger scheme of things, within the broader national framework or within the objectives that are set out by the condom SI in each country, we do see where this does not always align, and we may have to get another partner who will help to reach a target audience that we do want to also learn from. But really, it starts with, in this specific case, where that organization's strategy is overall and their clientele. Martin, you're a real life implementer, ask you to weigh in as well and talk us through that process of deciding who your audience will be for your campaign.
Thank you very much. From our side, obviously, we had to work within the national framework in terms of the condom priorities and where the need was. But also as an organization, we determined that we are going to work with an audience of young people in the age range 16 to 24. We also had our own assessments and baselines that indicated where the need was among young people. And so for this particular campaign, while it has a national reach, the greater part of it is emphasized in Lusaka because to us, we are taking it as a model project that would give us an opportunity for scale up and going forward, even to venture for other prospects that may help us to reach more young people. So it's an issue of national guidance, organizational priorities, and the needs of young people is observed from our work experience.
I totally agree with both of you. I think it all depends upon the country context, the needs and priorities of the populations, and also, what's the gap in terms of program reach. And all of these together can be termed as, which would actually help you decide your target audience. So yeah, I do agree with all of that. I don't see any other questions in the chat, so maybe we can move on to the next session. I would now like to invite our next speaker, who is Rafaela Eck. She's from FHI 360 as well. She's a consultant for telehealth at FHI 360. She supports projects in Mozambique and South Africa to implement online interventions such as online outreach, virtual case management, and online demand creation. Today, she's going to be focusing on the create and implement phase of this project. And she'll also be sharing a case example with some lessons learned. Over to you.
Thanks, Mavi. Thanks, Danny and Martin as well. So good afternoon on my side, but good morning for some and good evening for others. So let's discuss a little bit more in detail the next phase, which is create and implement. Next slide, please. So if the first phase is about developing the creating brief, describing, listing the target audience, understanding the target audience, and describe some of the elements on how the campaign should look like. So this is actually the phase that this is the creative process per se. So this is the phase that you, based on the creative brief, we're going to actually develop and produce the visual contents that are going to be disseminated during our digital campaign. So if the first phase would be more or less like writing a recipe, this is the phase that actually going to get all the ingredients together and you're going to cook and you're going to dish up. It's a very interesting phase. So let's see how it unfolds. Next slide, please. So at this stage, some organizations might rely on the support of a creative agency to provide overall creative direction and actually design the assets for the campaign. So this is pretty much like a collaborative process. It's not about the creative agency dumping those assets or the other way around, the partner saying this is what we want. But it's a very collaborative process that entails a lot of discussions amongst the partners, the implementers, and the creative agency. So the creative agency plays a very active role in this process. As far as we're concerned in our project, we did rely on the support of a creative agency that supported all countries, all implementers, and is still supporting them to actually think through the creative elements that they had already described in the creative brief, but they help them to think through in more details in terms of the message, the colors, and the visuals. Next slide, please. So those are some of the questions that might help us at this stage. This is pretty much about what is the creative approach and look and feel of the campaign. So it's a lot of brainstorming in terms of defining the tone of the campaign. Would you like something more funny, something more conservative, something more serious? What is the visual style and the colors? Are more like vivid colors or something that's more discreet? And the types of visual content to be used as well. At this stage, we're also going to be defining the specific visual assets that need to be created. Are you going to use just images, videos, infographics, or it's a mixture of all these types of assets? How we'll use the platforms to disseminate those contents. In our case, it's going to be used primarily Facebook. And finally, how we'll be testing those visual assets in terms of the message and the visuals with our target audience, right? Because they are our primary concern. So we need to make sure that you consult with them prior to the actual implementation of the campaign to make sure that the message resonates with them and that the colors and the visuals really speak with them. Next slide, please. So this is an example of a visual asset, a creative asset. That's the outcome of this phase, right? So this is the basic structure, the basic layout. We have the headline, which is the core message, and then we have the call to action. Remember, we want to move from awareness to action. So we want our target audience to act upon, do something after they are exposed to our creative assets. Then we have an image that can be a drawing or an actual image of our target audience. In this case, we have a young man there. And then at the very bottom, we're going to have the logos of the organizations. And in this case, we have a WhatsApp number that will basically help to link our target audience to condom channels, but it can also be our websites or even a physical address. Whatever helps our clients to act upon. And if we're talking about condoms, so that will help the clients to actually access condoms on the field. Next slide, please. Thanks. So we are, as we speak, we are still at this stage right now. So we are finishing this whole process of the creative process with the implementers at the countries, but we do have some observations and some lessons that can be drawn at this stage, right? So we know that social media ads, they limit the amount of text that can be used. So the headlines, they should be carefully developed. They should be really catchy. Less is more, of course. In terms of the creative agency, we know that that entails financial resources, and that's not always the case. This is not always available for all organizations. But in this case, the organizations can tap into like in-house resources such as graphic designers or other staff that are somehow specialized in content creation as well. So we understand that the partners do recognize the importance of social media marketing strategies to reach key demographics and target audience out there. So it's very important to bear in mind that it's not only about having, of course, just having images that sometimes can be stereotype driven to attract the target audience, so they can be quite obvious, so the target audience would immediately identify with them, but it's also relying on the dissemination techniques. So the ad managers are there to assist us to have a very effective dissemination in terms of targeting people like the interests and so forth. The countries, the implementers can also leverage some existing campaigns, and that can be quite advantageous. How we're going to see in a moment the experience of the Fazes ban in Mozambique, but that's not always the case, and that was the case for Condoms in Malawi and Zambia, even though this was like a well-established campaign that happened a while ago. It wasn't as fresh as enough, so that could be somehow adapted into the digital field. So this is something that needs to be taken into consideration. Next slide, please. Okay. So we understood that some national guides or templates, they do bring some very specific recommendations for campaigns in general, but sometimes they lack specific guidelines for social media campaigns. And that's very important because social media campaigns are different with regard to some aspects. So it's not, it doesn't mean that the general guidelines for general campaigns could be directly applied to social media campaigns. So it's very important to have very specific guidelines as well. In spaces, and I think that was the case for all of our countries here, where we have the Minister of Health or even some like technical working groups involved in this whole process. It's very important to have them on board from the very beginning, so they are part of all the discussions in order to avoid any delays with the actual implementation of the campaign. And lastly, it's very important that we always stay up to date with all the policies from the social platforms to make sure that we make the best use of what's available. So next slide, please. Great. So now we're gonna look in detail of the experience of Amodefa to illustrate this phase that we had just described, the second phase of creation and implementation and the whole creative process. So let's move on to the next slide. So Amodefa is a well-established organization in Mozambique. It has been operated since 1989 with the primary aim of promoting sexual and reproductive rights and services for adolescents and young people. So Amodefa has ample experience with behavior change activities and programs and projects and campaigns as well, but somehow it lacked substantial experience in the field of digital campaigns. And just to come back to something that Danny has said initially about some organizations lacking the ability to think strategically about the social media space, and that was certainly the case for Amodefa. So Amodefa became the implementer in Mozambique, tap into this opportunity to learn the methodology on how to create digital campaigns, to introduce this component into its current interventions. So the behavioral goal of the campaign is to promote condom use amongst young men and young women, and also men who have sex with men, aged between 15 and 35. They're also the campaign also direct the target audience to condom pickup points. That's the whole point, right? We want at the end of the day that the target audience does act upon and actually access condoms and do make use of condoms. Yes, thanks, Lainey. Next slide. So in parallel, there was another campaign that had just been developed in the country. It's called Fazes Bem. We can be loosely translated something like do it well. So this campaign was implemented by the HIV National Council and the Project Last Mile in the district of Boane. It's close to the capital Maputo, from December last year, March this year. And basically the objective was to encourage people, the general population, to use the government's free condoms, which they call Mahala. So the campaign entailed really like striking, innovative and eye-catching materials, images and colors that were displayed in a number of locations, walls, buses. We can see on our left how it looked like a promotion, like flyers. So those materials are made available at 150 locations, as well as the condoms, and as a result, more than 1 million condoms were distributed. So the campaign was pretty much successful. The image and the message resonated with people, and of course the visual elements are really striking. Have established the success of the campaign, Amodefa decided to adapt the Fazes Bem campaign to its own target audience, right? And the campaign was still very fresh. It had just finished the pilot phase. So it's still very fresh. People really remember the campaign. So it makes sense at this stage to adapt the campaign to its target audience. So let's see how that actually happens. Next slide, please. So at this stage, Amodefa had developed the campaign brief based on FHI methodology, as Danny has explained to us before. So because Amodefa was adapting an existing campaign, it was necessary to bring all partners on board, right? The previous partners, in that case, was CNCS, the Project Last Mile, and other partners right now that would be somehow interested in this campaign, like Lambda, which is an LGBTQI organization in the country. So we established a local committee to discuss the whole creative process. So the plan was discussed and approved, and have been held in regular meetings ever since to brainstorm on the messaging and the visuals and the illustrations, and how we can keep consistency between the campaigns, right? So there is this smooth transition from the original Fazes Bem to this next version of Fazes Bem, and people can immediately relate and see that actually it's the same campaign. Next slide, please. So as I said, the Amodefa's campaign keeps the same layout of the original Fazes Bem. As we can see on our right, we have the headline, it's like a very vivid colors in this very particular kind of drawing. And at the end, we have the punchline, which remains the same. It's something like use the Mahala condoms and do it well. The creative agency has proposed, as a result of all the discussions, 2 messages per each target group that are going to be played out with different images that speak to all age brackets within the same target audience. So we also had some consultation sessions with the target audiences to make sure that those images and the message resonated with them. The reception was quite positive. Next slide, please. So we have like a sample of some messages and images. So this for young men, and this speaks to young men in Mozambique who like this particular kind of music that's trap. I had never heard of, as I'm sure neither of you as well. So this it's not to be mixed with rap. So this music style pretty much encourages risk behaviors in terms of multiple partners, not like a fixed relationship. So the headline speaks directly to men who like this kind of music style. So it's something along the lines of, if you are from the trap, kind of like a trap community, use the Mahala condoms and do it well. The second image, and we can move to the next slide, is for young women. And our DEFA has a special concern with young women who engage in transactional sex, even though they don't identify as being female sex workers. They do engage. It's very common that they engage in transactional sex to a certain extent. So we have this image, and it says if you are in the vibe, and you have this woman who clearly has some intentions around sex, and the same call to action at the end. And finally, we have an image. Next slide. We have an image for MSM, which would be something like in and out protected. So we have this young man who has a girlfriend, but also attracted to men as well. So it speaks directly to MSM. All those images and messages are still subject to the CNCS approval, so they might change a little bit. Next slide, please. So these are some of the lessons learned that we have learned so far in this process. Like I said, this is still going on. This is still happening. So DEFA sets a very innovative precedent on how current campaigns can be expanded to include different target audiences. And it reinforces the same message across different target audience, right? And in this case, it's always the same message around use the Mahala condoms and do it well. It also promotes synergies between different partners. We have to bring everybody to the table to discuss how this adaptation will take place. So the partners from the original campaign, the government, and the partners who are part of the current campaign as well. So it paves the way for more sustainable initiatives. And of course, once we have like many partners working together, we have to navigate some political sensitivities. It's different to have just one organization to approve the visual assets. When you have many organizations on board, we need to make sure that everybody's happy with the final outcome in terms of the policies and the priorities. So yeah, it is indeed a consultation process that can demand time, and that's something that projects should take into consideration if they ought to adapt an existing campaign. They should take this additional time into consideration. So I think that would be all from my side. I'm open to answer any questions. So I'm just going to hand over to Purvi to help us with the question section. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that deep dive on how do you create and actually implement social media campaigns. I think just a note for the audience that all the 4 countries are currently in this phase that Rafaela just spoke about. The ministries of health and other stakeholders are currently going through these content pieces, which will then be approved and be disseminated as a social media campaign. So I see a few questions in the chat, and I'm just going to read them out, Rafaela, if you want to go ahead and answer these. What do you wish donors understood about the needs for demand creation? And how has the experience been of finding creative agencies in each country?
So let me start with the last one. Actually, we have one creative agency that has been supporting all 4 countries. At the same time, we had like a procurement process. We interview a number of organizations in the region, and then we select one organization. So now this organization is working with all 4 countries. The experience has been quite positive because, like I mentioned before, it has been a very collaborative process, right? So it's not that the creative agency has ideas of its own and the partners have, whatever the partners have developed in the country brief is like written in stone. So whatever you see, the creative assets at the end is like a result of this, a lot of discussion and brainstorming and working together. So what is the other question? Sorry. Let me check the chat. What do you wish donors understand? Okay.
What do you wish donors understood about the needs for demand creation?
Okay, yeah. I'll ask my previous colleagues to help me, Danny and Martin as well. At the top of my head, I would say that this is a process that takes time, right? We need significant time at the beginning to just liaise with all local partners. So that's something that I think that we need to understand from the very beginning. And also right now with the creative process, we have a lot of consultation, and so it also demands more time. So I think that's one thing that I would add, is just the time components. But I'm just gonna defer this to Danny. Danny, I don't know if you can just jump in and supplement as well from your side.
Yeah, Rafa.
Thank you.
Thank you. I 100% agree with that perspective. It does take time to bring everybody together on the same page, especially when multiple actors are involved. But I also think it's important to get donors to understand that virtual interventions on a whole, not just social media campaigns, they're multifaceted. And if we've learned anything from these implementers we're working with across the 4 countries, it is that they want solutions that help with bringing clients into services or linking them more efficiently to services. So while there is the SBC component, which is very important, and measuring that behavior change over time for those programs that have those communication objectives, there is some amount of resources and time that is required to introduce a system that actually links people to services. And key among that is, for many of these organizations, being able to confidently advocate for resources that help their staff to provide the best design outputs. And it might be a particular computer, it might be mobile devices, but also being able to adequately provide cover staff time to lead these activities in a meaningful way, from content creation and collaboration to actual execution and supporting the uptake of commodities. We're definitely seeing how social media can be a great tool as part of that last mile distribution. But certainly this experience is teaching us that unless partners are equipped enough to meet the actual demand and bridge services and campaigns. We spoke about this. It's not just random messages out there, but actually leading to specific outcomes. Then that linkage to that, to distribution points may not be as effective. So I just think those 2 things are what comes to mind. That coordination time it takes, and I mean, suffice to say, navigating the politics that can come with engaging stakeholders. For example, you might be working with a civil society organization that is primarily focused on advocacy, empowered to reach at-risk communities, and they have to collaborate with other stakeholders who, based on the context and fear of stigma and discrimination, will exercise a certain degree of caution and may delay the creative process and so on. So it takes time, and I think this project would have been very far advanced if, you know, the time taken to coordinate and bring people together on the same subject was not, it didn't take that much time. Over.
Thank you, Danny and Raphael. I just wanted to add one more point here, very important. I think a lot of times we don't communicate with donors correctly. It is important to tell them that demand creation, the reach might be really large, but the kind of conversion that we might have to actual service delivery or uptake might be lower than the reach, because we reach a large population on social media. Everybody does not get converted into uptake of service delivery. And so that is something that they need to expect as well. But at the same time, the audience that we reach in terms of services might be new audiences, never reached audiences. And so the quality of audience that you reach would be much better than the usual cohorts that we reach offline. So those are the few things that you do need to explain to your donors when you are initiating this kind of a project. There are a couple of other questions in the chat. I'm going to leave it for now. I'm going to move on to the next presentation, and we can take these questions in the next Q&A section. So I'm going to invite Danny again to give us an overview or a deeper dive on the implementation phase 3, which is going to be the next phase for all the countries, which is on monitor and adjust. And one of the questions in the chat actually speaks about how do you monitor your demand creation activities. I think that would be answered when Danny presents his section as well. So over to you, Danny.
Thanks, Purvi. And yep, that's a great segue into this segment of our presentation. As Purvi had shared earlier, a lot of the programs are now leaving phase 2, entering into phase 3, where campaigns are live and we're monitoring and adjusting. And what do we mean by that? It means that we have systems in place to effectively monitor or watch the campaign as it's rolling out and leverage performance metrics to help course correct or improve those campaigns, right? And what we'll do is to modify visual content. So the next round of content that's supposed to go out, we can learn from the implementation of the first set, or we can add more diverse elements so that it is all-encompassing and people don't get tired from seeing the same thing. We can look at what works best, do more of that and less of what doesn't work so well, and so on and so forth. And really, it's about implementing evaluation activities to gauge the campaign's impact on communication and behavioral objectives. The truth is, from the prioritize and plan phase, the very first phase I spoke to, that's where those key decisions are taken about what exactly are the outcomes we want to measure. But more broadly and universally across all campaigns, I can say that programs will be looking at those metrics that are generated through the social media ad managers, where we will see interaction with the content that's posted online. And also, if there is a key call to action, which there is for all countries, it may include clicking a link, starting a chat, we will be able to say what that conversion is like. And so while we're not fully in this phase as yet, I won't take too long with these few slides, but it's really showing you at high level how we're able to measure some of those outcomes. Historically, programs may introduce a second survey later on to people who have come in for services or have seen a particular social media ad campaign. And programs are able to compare how behavior has changed over time based on how people responded to the questions before the launch of campaign, after the launch of campaign, or having walked into services. In this phase, the partners would have set their campaign outcomes and indicators for success. Some of them are behavioral and some of them are those hardwired social media metrics that I will talk to you about. And as partners implement their campaigns, FHI, we will continue to build their capacity to use these ad managers and measure the campaign effectiveness over time. And of course, the next few weeks, we're going to be doing a lot of course correcting and checking in to see what is actually happening. So in this experience, partners are really learning. It is not just click, post, release, disappear, but it involves a lot of monitoring and making necessary adjustments as we go through. A key tool, I think someone asked about a tool. Yeah, I don't remember, but someone did ask about a tool that we are using, and it's the Facebook Ads Manager, which is twofold, right? It is a system that helps you to organize the campaign material. So Rafa spent a great deal of time describing the creative content that can come forward for campaigns. These can be static images, meaning they don't move. They're those stills with text written all over them and catchy images and colors. But then there are also informative short videos or short GIFs or animation that shows people how to take different steps to do things or get them excited. We load those into this ad manager, set the parameters for who we want them to reach, and then over time, that is where we go to monitor what is happening, right? So we can set the precise audience targeting, like the age, gender, and some interests that we'll see coming out. And we get a chance to have some customizable scheduling and device targeting and location-based options that are built into the Facebook Ad Manager. So it is a great tool to have because all indications, including the advocacy of the implementers, point to starting off with social media advertising. And I think it's great that this tool does exist by default to do this. I won't spend too much time on this, but in case anyone isn't really familiar with this kind of framework, on Facebook itself, you get to choose your objective and then you load those key elements about your audience and targeting strategy in, and then you add those creative elements that we spoke to. There is no social media campaign that's going to be effective without those creative assets, right? And then over time, this is a random example from somewhere else, but just to give you an example of the interface we have, we get to look at the campaigns as they're loaded in. Each organization will be using their own Facebook page to promote the ads. So the ads are not coming from a foreign entity. The ads in Mozambique are coming out from Amadifa, and they're coming out from SAT in Zambia, and Marpi and Pace in Uganda, and so on. And they're with us, we'll be meeting regularly to look at these performance metrics and make adjustments as needed to the campaign tool sets. For this specific project, this is one primary source of that evaluation, and it differs per country. We know, for example, at SAT, we've heard from Martin earlier, they are keen on taking their evaluation a notch further. They have, at the start of this project, hired 4 outreach officers that are going to be working, as Martin said, sharing time to be online 24 hours, I guess beyond the condom campaign, but they will be there to monitor these requests that are coming in and provide support and direct clients to distribution points. And there's also a plan over time for them to follow up with each client who has indicated, well, I want condoms. They'll check in with them within 2 weeks to see if they did show up or what challenges they had accessing those condoms. And that's how you kind of get the data in to improve how the campaigns work. From one end, improving the campaign reach online, but on another end, improving how service uptake is being facilitated through the campaigns. Maybe we learned through SAT that people found it annoying that they had to go through a lengthy process just to get some condoms at a distribution point, or they just couldn't find the time to go based on the opening or operating hours of that site. We don't know what we learned yet from those approaches, but certainly the programs would have been sifting through very early on what kind of metrics, and these are in their campaign briefs, they want to measure as success. Back to you, Pravi.
Thank you, Danny. That was very helpful. I think people would really appreciate that kind of information. That I think would have answered Jacob's question on what systems is the project using to monitor the impact of the social media campaign. I think because this is going to be the next phase, what Danny just presented is actually the system that they will be using to monitor the campaign results. There's another question which says, when designing the social media campaign, was there a research done, or are there any plans to explore the influencer market? Danny?
Yes, so that's a very great point. As part of the survey that we conducted, we asked clients, respondents to share those perspectives about who are, influential figures that they follow online or are interested in hearing from, as well as we asked them about specific interests that they may have. So we asked them if there is any particular interest that they have regarding Facebook pages and groups. And those things help us to target our ads. You are right that we're observing a huge influencer market in Zambia. But for this project, there will be no influencer marketing. But as a workaround, for example, in Zambia, to make sure we're tapping into this space, SAT is deciding to work with some of the other youth influencers that are out there, sending them key messages on a pro bono basis. But typically, we have in the training materials as well, imparted on the implementers the techniques or the strategies for onboarding influencers that can help with the campaign, like setting up an agreement and the different types of influencers you can have. You can have influencers that are really just pushing your message, as well as influencers that are trying as much as possible to get people to take a specific action. And these can be through a paid arrangement, or it can be through pro bono. And in Zambia, we will be working with, specifically Zambia, we'll be working with some other youth influencers to get the message out. So as the content's generated, it is also shared with them. And we will be able to look at how those materials perform against the ones that SAT will be paying for to run as ads. I hope that makes sense. I saw where Martin, you had your hand raised. I don't know if you wanted to add to that point or if that was something completely different.
Yeah, I got the sense you made the statement that I wanted to contribute.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. We have one last question. I think we only have time for one more question. So the question is, do the implementing organizations ride on social trends and events in content creation? If so, how has been their experience?
Yeah, I think I can take that one. Yes, they do. They do, and that's one of the important traits or characteristics of social media marketing. You are more effective or impactful when you do ride on those trends and consider what's happening in the virtual space, especially because we see in all of these 4 countries that they're trying to reach a younger demographic. And we understand that they don't necessarily open their Facebook app every day going to see, oh my God, let me see what kind of condom information is out here today. So we have to be creative and try to tap into whatever existing trends that are happening in the country. You saw in Rafa's presentation where she spoke about the trap culture, TRAP, trap culture, that's prevalent among young people in Mozambique. That came out of those consultations, and we're playing on that as well. In Zambia, we're learning that young people, we learn through our partners that we're working with that young people prefer to focus on an element of love when younger, especially teenagers prefer to focus on an element of love when it comes to conversation around sex, versus a much older demographic that may not necessarily commit to relationships and may have different partners and so on. So how you communicate about condom to those different groups depends on what their interests are or what they're interested in. Did some focus groups over time and learned from young women that they really like talking about what's trendy and what's in fashion. And it's just interesting to see how the creative agency is bringing that into play. So we spoke earlier about the creative agency being a critical force, and it's because they tend to bring the experience to the table in having this bird's eye view and looking across and helping us to make the decision about what trends we tap into and what we don't.
Thank you, Danny. I think that answers that question well. I think we are at time and we can close this webinar. So thank you very much for all the participants and for all the information and all the questions that everyone asked. It was a very interesting discussion. Lastly, I'm just going to close this webinar with something that Carla just wrote in the chat. Carla, I'm going to use your lines for my closing remarks. So this Condom Strategic Initiative was actually created by Global Fund. And mainly to understand and look at the upstream areas for condom programming, stewardship, demand creation, and last mile distribution. So it's just that it's extremely important that we understand that commodity distribution is also an extremely important part of any program. And increase in demand creation would lead to increase in uptake of services as well. And public-private sector partnerships would play a very important role as well if we have to increase our reach and of course uptake of services. She's also mentioned that it's important that we continue to advocate with countries about the importance of demand creation and then monitor the results of these social media campaigns so that we can better these campaigns and basically keep investing in them so that we get newer audiences and newer populations to get into services. Thank you very much. Have a great evening, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.